Thank you very much for joining. My name is Kunbi Ademola. I am a data privacy officer at Data Privacy Advisory Service. And today's webinar is on the subject of managing CCTV operations and data protection compliance. It's a very important topic, and it's something we all interact with every day, which is why, based on our recent experience advising clients and seeing developments as well in the polity, we have decided to produce this webinar on the subject. And I have very experienced panelists here who are going to be sharing from their wealth of experience with us. And I'm just going to ask them to introduce themselves now, starting with Lewis Bourne, please.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to talk to you today. My name's Lewis Bourne. I'm the Data Protection Officer and have been for about 25 years at Dudley Metropolitan Borough Council. Going back to 2018, I was made Senior Responsible Officer for CCTV governance, and I've been working on a major project within Dudley Council on our portfolio of 1,400 cameras. Hopefully I can communicate my experiences to you today.
Thank you very much, Lewis. Natalie, please.
Yeah, thank you, Kunbi. Good morning, everyone. I am Natalie, or just Nat, it's absolutely fine. I currently work for DPOs, leading our consultancy team. So see lots of the compliance side of CCTV, and in another life, worked in a more operational role, doing security consultancy for various venues and events around the UK. So hopefully a little bit of pragmatic advice from me too.
Thank you very much, Natalie. And we're looking forward to the insights from the both of you. So that's our panel, just in case you want to see their faces. And now on the subject for today's webinar. And we're just going to go back to Lewis for a bit to start with. Lewis, you mentioned having a portfolio, a huge portfolio of 1,400 cameras. And that's something that is bound to bring up a lot of data protection responsibility in your role. And we'd just like to know what the background was for instituting that project, because as we know, one of the principles is determining that there's a pressing need for the institution of a CCTV system in any location. So how did you come about the decision to install that system? What considerations, what processes did you undertake in making the decision to institute the system in the first place?
Okay, hi, Kunbi. Yes, well, our hand was probably forced in terms of the latest project. Like most local authorities, we had for many years a legacy CCTV system. We shared a CCTV control room with the local police, and had quite a broad analog, aged CCTV system in place right the way up until about the start of 2018. We were then informed by our police colleagues that they were going to sell off the building that our CCTV control room was in and have it demolished and turn it into flats. So our hand was forced in terms of redeveloping our CCTV portfolio, and it was a prime time. It was for me, in that I was just made Senior Responsible Officer, and there was the GDPR was coming into force. So we took the view that any CCTV development going forward must take into consider privacy by design and default. So we were very much focused on making sure that we fully complied with data protection law, involved and collaborated and looked at the proportionality and the quality of the equipment that we got in place at that particular point in time. So it was very much starting from scratch, building from foundation, a completely new CCTV control room and CCTV portfolio across the country. Now, in terms of local government, we've certainly got legislation such as Section 7 of the Crime and Disorder Act, which places direct responsibilities on local authorities to combat crime and antisocial behaviour. So we started to build business cases around that. We've also got the Section 163 of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act, 1994 that requires us to collaborate with our police colleagues in developing CCTV systems, and we started focusing on that. We started holding consultation exercises with groups of citizens across the borough. We have 320,000 citizens across the Dudley borough in about 5 different townships, and we started holding consultation with them. We talked to local colleges and students at those colleges about how they felt safe and secure. We talked to single parent groups about how they felt safe and secure in the townships, and we also started to look at crime stats that our community safety team manage with the police. And so using all of those tools and all those resources and engaging with our elected members, we started to build a profile as how we want to go forward with our CCTV portfolio. So it was very much about collaboration and involving all groups that we could possibly get to right from the start and build up from foundation.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Lewis, for that very clear explanation. So I'm going to go to Natalie now and just ask for an overview of the lawful basis and sort of other data protection considerations. But before we come back to you to give us a more hands-on breakdown of what the steps you took to determine necessity, proportionality, and other such considerations. But for Natalie now, the question is, if as a consultant, right, what are the considerations you believe, or you've assisted organizations in evaluating in the course of conducting a privacy impact assessment for implementing a project such as this, starting with, say, the lawful basis for which they would undertake the project?
Yeah, I think lawful basis is yes, a major part, but is a cog in a much bigger machine that you touched on there, DPIAs, data protection impact assessments. And, that's really your sort of building block that Lewis touched on, everything that he was saying about that engagement and your justifying necessity, proportionality, even transparency from the beginning. And they're all things that are built into that prep work. I think there is an appetite that we justify legal basis and, we have a lawful reason to do this. And, that depends on the sector that you work in. Public sector generally relying on public interest, whereas private sector more so legitimate interest on the sort of grand scheme of things. But it's a much bigger piece of work than that. And like Lewis indicated, that the initial engagement from not only your staff and the internal teams, but getting that external consultation, who do the data subjects, who are they, what do they feel, that actually builds into a larger piece of work. The lawful basis is actually a relatively small part of that.
Yeah.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. Thank you very much. Lewis, do you want to expand a bit on the subject of how you approached determining you're conducting your data protection impact assessments, any other assessments you might have undertaken in the course of the project?
Yes, certainly. It's in terms of our, can I just clarify the 1,400 cameras that I mentioned that we've got across the borough aren't all township cameras. So I don't want to give people the impression that we have got we have saturated our borough with cameras and you can't move anywhere. We've only got about 120 township cameras. The rest are in car parks. They may be on building security. There may be body cameras on parking control operatives and things like that. So that is the complete portfolio. So only certain cameras are in townships, and I must admit we haven't done all of them. We've only done a proportion of those, but we're setting the foundations going forward. In terms of your question, Kunbi, what we decided to do was specifically go through the Biometrics and Surveillance Commissioner's passport to compliance. So the passport to compliance is made up of 3 stages. It's stage 1, justification and planning, stage 2, operational report and system specification, and stage 3, implementation. And we saw quite early on that we did not have the skills in-house to fully complete to the level we wanted it to be completed. We wanted to be the best of breed in developing this system. We wanted to make sure it was future proof, and we could use it for a good period of time, because it was a major investment, a multi-million-pound investment we were building on here. So at an early stage, we engaged with a local firm of consultants. We were fortunate enough to have a firm of consultants where the chief exec of that firm actually sits on the Biometric and Surveillance Commissioner's review board. So we were very lucky to have that at that stage, and we asked the consultants to carry out, first of all, a borough-wide and specific township threat analysis, so that we got that proportionality, we'd got that view as to exactly what we were trying to do, and that would enable us to decommission cameras if they weren't needed, and put cameras in right places. As part of that threat analysis, they looked at the regional crime statistics and the township crime statistics. We also asked them to do camera observations where they were already sighted. So they did full assessments on each individual camera as to what the privacy implications were, where privacy masking might be needed, where they perhaps need to be resighted, and then worked all the way through the various stages with them of the passport to compliance, stage 1, stage 2, where operational requirement developments and system specification, and then stage 3, the tender process for getting all the equipment in and choosing the right supplier. And all of this fed into the Biometric and Surveillance Commissioner's data protection impact assessment. So all of this evidence that we were gathering, all of these consultations that we were holding, fed into the data protection impact assessment that we produced right at the start, before any processing on the new system was being undertaken.
Thank you very much, Lewis. And someone has asked a question, put it in the chat actually, but the question is that, where do you stop using prevention as a reason to install cameras? And the answer to that, I'm going to just give my answer to that based on the insights that have been shared by Natalie and Lewis, our experts here today. But the answer to that is that it's going to be determined by what the results of your assessments are. The very first principle in the surveillance camera code is you must determine a pressing need for the installation of whatever system you are looking to install. And that has to be documented based on evidence. So Lewis had mentioned that they had taken crime statistics, they had consulted the actual citizens of who were going to be covered by these cameras. So there's no right or wrong answer to it. It's impossible to answer with any given figure, but it has to be based on an objective assessment of the circumstances of your community. And I'm just going to go now into technology. So that's under practical considerations, because Lewis, you mentioned choosing the technology with which you would operate the system. And that's very important, because obviously the system relies on the technology. Without that, the system is not going to function effectively. So what considerations did you have in mind when selecting the systems, the different components of the tech aspects of the system, the cameras and the servers, any other elements?
Okay, so I'm not a technical person, but certainly was involved in the procurement of the solutions in consultation with our external consultants, and what we were looking for was high definition, quality cameras with from a supplier that could provide the appropriate maintenance and support and future proofing that equipment, and also gave us the flexibility to address data protection subject access requests, for instance, requests from our police colleagues and requests from insurance companies and solicitors, enable us to privacy block that. That was the priority, enable us to apply the appropriate privacy controls so that we weren't impeding anybody's privacy in those circumstances, and enable us with a solution that gave us the flexibility to have quality images, control the images that were captured, and meet our retention requirements and codes of practice. So so it was a difficult decision. We took advice from consultants, and we did go with the best of breed at the time. They're not cheap, and we managed to negotiate a distributor. I think, I'm not sure what the procurement terms are, but I think we negotiated a distributor's status with the company, so that we do a lot of installations ourselves. We use our own engineers to our street lighting engineers and people like that to do the installations. We use our own dedicated fiber optic network around the borough to carry the images, so they're not exposed to any public networks of that nature. So it was a very difficult decision, but based on best of breed technology at the time.
Thank you very much, Lewis. So Nat, in advising clients like the council on choosing, potential sources for equipment, what sorts of data protection considerations and what sorts of documentation would be required to do so in a way that's compliant?
Thanks, Kunbi. Big question. First of all, technical requirements are different for every organisation. It's, we're going back to that sort of first steps. What is the purpose here? Township cameras, it makes sense for them to pan, tilt, zoom. You're monitoring on a relatively large scale, and you want that accessibility to a large area. Having a pan, tilt, zoom camera on a static entrance, on I don't know, a waste sort of storage area that's prone to arson, seems excessive. So first of all, it's that proportionality thing again, the justification of the technology that you need. Is it fit for purpose? Is there a less intrusive way of doing what you're trying to achieve? So minimizing that risk to begin with. And all of that would feed into a DPIA. I think it's worth mentioning actually that a lot of people that come from a data protection background fall foul of using a standard DPIA template for CCTV. Whereas the Biometric Surveillance Camera Commissioner actually have, alongside the ICO, have a specific DPIA template for CCTV. And that does look into the width of the images, the angles, the very specifics of the cameras. So the technology itself, very personal to the individual. What's the purpose? What we're trying to do now. Once we've chosen those things, really it's the security arrangements that, from a data protection compliance, they're the next step. So there's obligations throughout the legislation, GDPR for security processing. So we need to, again, the same words come up. They need to be necessary. They need to be proportionate to the processing and the risk associated. So I know Lewis will be able to talk on some great security measures that they've implemented actually at Dudley, but closed networks, encryption in transit and at rest, are kind of basic access controls. So again, it's about proportionality. What are we processing, and what security measures are we going to put in place that are proportionate to the risk of the data we're collecting? So DPIAs, again, there's certainly some sort of policy documents to go in the background, that are tying up those loose ends and are putting that message across to everybody else. But quite a difficult question for me to ask and answer accurately, I think, in the time frame, as it's so specific to each organisation. Lewis, I don't know if you want to touch on some of the security measures you implemented.
Yes, you mentioned the some security measures there. Yes, we've definitely got encrypted transition of images from camera to control room. Some of our cameras use Wi-Fi. Again, that's encrypted transmission through to the control room. The control room itself, the security measures we've got in place there. There are it's a bit like GCHQ. I think there are actual airlocks to try and get into the control room. We've very much tried to set it up so it is a secure environment, but does have certain areas and zones where people can go and view images, can extract images where they've got a lawful basis to do so. We made the decision that we didn't want to train staff to access to manage the control room, in-house staff. So we actually went out and we used a firm of consultant, an outsourced provider to run our control room operation for us. Now they use our premises. They are really pleased to use our state-of-the-art premises, and we have a good. I noticed there's a comment in the chat about the disjoint between the DPO procurement and control room staff. What we did very early on is we set up a working group, an operational working group, CCTV operational working group that's chaired by the director who has responsibility for community safety. That involves all partners, the police, the control room staff, and key individuals across the organisation. And so we were all singing from the same hymn sheet. As far as the strategy is concerned, we regularly discuss any disjointedness between that, and we've got a good working relationship with IT, control room, police, and all those who are involved. And we've got automated processes for dealing with subject access requests that come in, go straight through to our control room staff. The information is extracted, kept in secure containers outside the normal retention run, and then delivered as appropriate. So I think we've got a really. I think it's about setting those foundations right from the start, and I think we were in a bit of a luxury situation compared to a lot of colleagues out there, in that we were forced to start from ground up, and so we were able to build this relationship as well as the network, and we knew what we wanted in terms of security. As I said before, we've got a dedicated fiber optic network, which is all the cabling and the trunking for that was already in place. With the old analog network was there, so all we had to do was rerun cabling through the old trunking, and so that's added to the security. There have been security concerns raised in the media over the use of Chinese technology. So we do get regular assurance from our equipment provider as to the technology's status and their association with other countries and any news media. So we get a written, documented assurance from those providers, and we do try and assure our elected members that our network is secure, not open unless somebody digs up a hole in the street and actually taps directly into the network. And I don't want to give you ideas, but actually taps into the network, then our network is fairly secure in terms of security.
Thank you very much, Lewis. And just to chip in on that point to say that what Lewis has described is fulfillment of the requirement under the UK GDPR to put in appropriate organizational and technical measures to ensure that the security of any personal data being processed is assured. And that's everything from having the technical measures, the air gaps, the encryption, the firewalls, as well as having access control, physical access control, to ensure that people who shouldn't be having access to any personal data, in this case surveillance footage, will not have that data. And on the subject of the question that was asked about having a disjoint between the DPO, procurement, and control room staff, that's something that we regularly encounter when providing advice to clients at DPAS. And typically, when we're preparing procedures, policies, we try to ensure that we integrate the requirement for there to be interdepartmental cooperation. And this always, we try to ensure that it includes management, to ensure that there's a top-down approach to ensuring that there's a drive to comply with all the necessary measures required under the law, whether that's the GDPR and any other applicable law. So my question to Lewis is just to expatiate a bit more on the subject of the organizational measures, specifically in respect of that working group. So if you could just provide a bit more clarity on which departments are involved. Does it encompass, management, how much so, and any other details that could help anyone considering instituting something similar?
Okay, so what in terms of the structure we've got, the governance structure we've got, we have got a CCTV working party. As I said before, that's made up of partners and internal organisational members. We have a CCTV manager, which is internal, so separate from the consultancy, from the outsourced company that does the control room management. And that CCTV manager is responsible for ensuring that DPIAs are conducted for every single new camera, every single camera that's an extension to the existing system, and our portfolio of redeployable cameras. So any new camera that comes on will fit into a category. So we've divided our cameras up into say township cameras, highways cameras, car park cameras, into various different categories. And there is a DPIA using the Biometric and Surveillance Commissioner's template. We've got templates set up for each category that we utilize. We go out to our elected members and discuss the need for cameras with our elected members, who consult with their citizens about the deployment of a camera or the installation of a permanent camera in that particular area. So constant consultation and collaboration. That's all fed back to the working group, who make the final decision based on evidence that's been submitted forward for the deployment of or installation of a new camera. And it's not until that working group gives the go-ahead with consultation with the public and the elected members, a leaflet drop, signposts being signage being put into areas. It's not until that has been done before a camera is actually installed. So we've got quite a rigorous process to go through before cameras get to being on the streets. So quite a pyramid type of organizational structure that checks, double checks, plans, and then does the actual work involved. So consultation with everybody, and a reference to our data protection CCTV policies that exist, our operational policies that exist, all available on Dudley's website, which I can put a link in the chat later for that. Does that answer your question, Kunbi, at all?
Yes, you did, very, very comprehensively. Thank you very much. And ultimately, what I'm hearing is that there's always a balance to be found between wanting to be as thorough, as comprehensive, as secure as possible, and potentially efficiency. And that, it's in the interest of the data subjects as well as the organization to err on the side of security and thoroughness to ensure that all decisions can be validated and justified within the context of data protection and privacy. Thank you very much, Lewis. So, Natalie, someone has asked a question that I think will benefit from your expert insight here. And that's, the person is looking for, the organization is looking to implement a cloud-based CCTV system, and they want some of their staff to be able to have access to the system footage via their work mobile phones, rather than going to the office. So from a data protection, privacy perspective, what are your initial impressions?
You've given me these really broad questions on purpose. There is no hard, fast no, so that's for sure. There's lots of organizations that already do this. It's going back to proportionality and justification. So you'd need to do some sort of supplier assessment, work out what security measures, how does that link work? What are the security measures are in place? Are they proportionate to the risk? The legislation, for anybody that would like to read up, is Article 32 of UK EU GDPR. And it actually specifically says that we should take into account nature, scope, purpose of processing, context. So, those are the things we're considering. It being cloud-based and there being remote access doesn't change what we're considering. We just need to consider those things in that context. So if the appropriate security measures are in place, if it's auditable, if you've got decent access controls, if you have an acceptable use policy, it's about having those technical and organizational measures. They're not a blocker, and they don't have to stop you doing things all the time. They need to support the processing that you're doing, and it being done in a legal, in a lawful and a fair way. So it's definitely not a no. It's certainly possible to use remote access with a mobile phone. You just need to make sure that you've done your homework and the things are in place in the background that mean that the data remains safe and the organization still remains a level of control over that processing. Again, we're going back to that sort of necessity and proportionality thing, and technical measures are really, really easy to discuss, especially when we're talking about CCTV that has such technical hardware. But organizational measures are still so important and, you know, shouldn't be sort of undermined. That yes, having incredible security, technical security measures in place is brilliant and provides an enormous amount of resilience against cyber threat. But organizational measures target something completely different. And when you're looking at things like employees using phones to remote access CCTV, those organizational measures are probably actually going to be more beneficial than technical ones.
Thank you very much, Natalie. So that's extremely clear. And the answer is that it's always going to be based on an assessment of the risk, that implementing any given measure is going to, whatever risk it's going to impose on data subjects. So technical measures, are there going to be things in the mobile phones that prevent screen recordings from being taken or from screenshots from being taken? Organizational measures, what amount of training do the staff have to understand the importance of maintaining the privacy of whatever it is they are looking at on their mobile phones? What sorts of internal systems are there to, encourage, best practice on one hand and discourage and potentially sanction any sorts of infractions on the other hand? And that takes me to the question of frequent mistakes, which one of which we have seen is neglecting staff training and staff organization-wide awareness of staff members' obligations in respect to privacy and data protection. So, Lewis, what approach have you taken with respect to data protection in Dudley? How have you implemented that? Do you have onboarding training, ongoing training, refresher training? How do you ensure that your organization and through its staff are always ready to comply with data protection?
Okay, so these are great questions, Kunbi, by the way. In terms of data, the generic data protection training, we do have quite a robust e-learning program for all of our staff. We've probably got about 5,000 employees, up to 5,000 employees at Dudley Council. Any new employee, an existing employee, has to complete mandatory training. That e-learning has been dictated as being mandatory by our strategic executive board, so it's got senior level buy-in. It has to be completed by new recruits before any access to systems is granted, and all staff have to refresh training on a biannual basis, but apart from those who work in adult social care and children's social care, who have a refresher on an annual basis. So quite a robust regime. That information is fed into our HR system, and it's then picked up by managers on their annual reviews and supervision meetings to make sure that they're doing that training. So there's a rigorous training program already in place for all staff, and it covers CCTV, because CCTV is personal data, or can be personal data of individuals, so it covers that. In terms of the CCTV operation, that's one of the decisions to outsource our CCTV operation, was the legal requirement for control room staff to have SIA licenses and appropriate licensing to monitor images. And that also impacts on the previous question that Natalie answered about remote access, people on their mobile phones, things like that. So it all depends on, if it's live feed, it's slightly different, but if people can extract, store, save and edit images, then from CCTV footage, then you will need to make sure that you've got the right training for those staff, because they could be in breach of Surveillance Commissioner requirements, or even the law, if they haven't got the right training to access those images for editing, saving and storing purposes. So a rigorous training program has got to be in place.
Thank you very much, Lewis. On the subject of training for Nat, is the Dudley chose to outsource the monitoring the control center function of their CCTV system. For organizations who are thinking of, keeping everything in-house, what are going to be your tips on training? Would you be recommending any specific training aspects, SARS, for instance, or role-specific training? How would you suggest that they approach the need to ensure their staff are all up to speed with their data protection obligations?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Kunbi. The roles and responsibilities are what are going to define it. So role-based training is absolutely necessary. And as Lewis reiterated, just to echo that sentiment, and that training is going to be specific to the people that have different roles or responsibilities. So as quite a sweeping statement, but quite commonly control room staff, CCTV operators will not be dealing with subject access requests, for example. They require a very, very different skill set. They generally don't work in governance. Of course, they need that kind of basic understanding of the data protection principles and how CCTV is personal data or can be personal data. That CCTV operator training is accredited by the SIA. It's a license that has to be renewed. That there is only one way to do that. However, depending on who is dealing with data sharing, subject access requests, any type of disclosure, who monitors retention, who does the DPIAs, who does the annual check for DPIAs, who is keeping up to date with that governance stuff, the training needs to go to them. And not just the DPO, it's really important that line managers or supervisors, people that are having that, are involved in that conversation, have adequate training. And that can look like lots of different things. I mean, subject access requests are an enormous area. If we're talking about a team that deals with all subject access requests and redaction work, then, there's day courses. We offer one at DPAS. There's specific training for that. If we're talking about people that are in, SARS as a kind of secondary role, if you like, that might be overkill, or maybe something more general, maybe even like a BCS Foundation certificate in data protection, really well recognized qualification, and gives you a really good, solid overview of data protection in practice. So yeah, CCTV operationally is very specific. The requirements are, very black and white. There's very specific providers that can give you that. But there's a lot to consider where the governance side and the compliance pieces with CCTV. As one of the questions earlier on mentioned, that there's often a disjoint between the DPO or the governance team and the people that are operating CCTV that are making decisions. Lewis and Dudley are a real kind of shining example of how it should be done. That so frequently we speak to people that don't have that relationship, speak to DPOs that they've been brought in after the fact. We've commissioned all of this CCTV, it's being installed, what do we need to do? So the more training, the better the culture, the more exposure people have, and the more they understand the requirements, ultimately, the better that communication is going to get as well. Of course, the obvious answer is train all of your staff to a really good sort of standard, but my best piece of advice is any line managers, any service leads, get them to a good standard, and they can share that out with the rest of their team.
Thank you very much, Nat. And I'm sure both answers now provide any organization with a very thorough example of how to approach the issue of training staff. Now, on a second frequent mistake, which is the joining a very interesting turn of phrase that Lewis used when we had a meeting some time ago, which is that you must avoid joining the tech arms race. And I'm just going to let him explain that in his own words. So, as a frequent mistake, how did you come across that? What do you think organizations need to watch out for, Lewis?
Well, from my perspective, it was the new technology became shiny new toys for our technology people. So they wanted to play with those toys, and it was a case of them getting a little bit impatient, waiting for the governance to kick in. So as well as the township cameras, we brought technology for door entry systems, for example. So they were putting new door entry systems to replace our swipe cards, and the technology, whilst it's not turned on, I'll say right at the start, the technology would allow facial recognition for door entry systems. They wanted to try these things out. They also wanted to try out ANPR on some of our parks without the proper consultation and governance arrangements, because they saw that the technology was there and they wanted proof of concept, and they wanted to sell it and demonstrate how it could be exploited to some of our members and directors. So it was a little bit frustrating to try and rein them back in, saying, no, you can't do that yet. And as we're still 4 or 5 years down the line now, I have not let them, well, I'll say I'm not let them. We have not got to the stage where I am satisfied that the governance arrangements are correct to allow them to turn on facial recognition for door entry systems in our public buildings, for our staff buildings. That in my opinion is still needs a lot of work to be done. So the mistake was by our technology people thinking, well, we can use this technology to race ahead here. We can replace all our security key codes on the doors and things like that. So it's making sure you've got a streamlined governance process that doesn't make people wait, I think. So is one thing. Speed it up.
Thank you very much, Lewis. That's certainly clear enough. And it's something, again, that, like Nat mentioned earlier, that should go through a thorough process assessing what the potential impacts would be before greenlighting any given technology or feature of the system, not just implementing and activating a feature for the sake of it or because it's potentially available. And now let's discuss what ongoing monitoring looks like, because again, you mentioned being in the process of upgrading the system, conducting audits, and what sorts of things are you looking for? What are you looking to evaluate? And how will those things potentially impact how you operate the system going forward? Lewis.
We have regular ongoing auditing of our camera locations, as probably similar with all my public sector friends in local government. We see our townships are developing all the time. There's new residential development. There's conversion of shop and office space into residential development. So that means that the cameras could inadvertently become cameras that are monitoring public, private personal space. So we have a regular audit process in place where our control room staff go through every single camera and check the privacy masking tools that are in place. That's an essential requirement. If you don't do that, you can easily go down the route of being in breach of data protection legislation and human rights legislation by monitoring someone's front window. We did have one situation where an office block right next to one of our cameras was turned into residential accommodation, and we quickly had to change the masking on that, because you only had to turn the camera to the right and you could see straight into somebody's front room and watch the television. So it was you need to keep an eye on what's happening in your townships and in your areas, and audit accordingly to make sure that your systems are compliant. We're also looking at the longer term. So I still view this as being in the design and development stage, because we haven't completed our portfolio yet of migrating the cameras onto this new all singing all dancing core system that we've got. So it's the design and development stage still of the camera portfolio, but we need a proper strategy. We haven't got a proper strategy in place. So only in the last couple of months we've engaged another firm of consultants to come in and work with us on a security and safety strategy, to give us a strategy going up to 2030. So they will be looking at, are we using the right type of technology, addressing concerns such as the ethical use of certain types of technology, are we focusing on the correct community safety criteria. So it was 5 years ago that we 4 years ago that we started to communicate with the public and ask them what their views were on safety. Do we need to revisit that and look at the technology we're using? We are rationalizing our property portfolio as well, like many local authorities, because of we've got a lot of home workers now, so we're selling stuff off. So what do we need to decommission? So there's lots of work to do, lots of audits. It's all very much this plan, do, check, review type of process over and over again. You can't just turn it all on and forget about it.
Thank you very much, Lewis. So we're going to go to the next session, which is on speaking about the prospective aspects to this, what the future might look like. And then I'm going to ask you, Lewis, if you were in the position where you had doubts as to how compliant your CCTV system that you had inherited, assuming you just came into the role, how would you approach, fixing things? And Natalie again will share her opinion on, perhaps is it an analysis, a gap analysis, something like that. But before that, we have a question which is very interesting, and it's something that I know that Nat has dealt with something similar recently on behalf of the client, and that's a council wants to share CCTV images of individuals, adults, who on social media who have committed various environmental crimes like littering, graffiti, fly tipping. And what are your initial impressions? I know, again, it's impossible to give a specific right or wrong answer, but what sorts of things would you advise this council to take into consideration when reaching a decision?
Yeah, of course. I'll keep this a little bit shorter. I'm conscious of time. There's two ways of looking at this. The law says you can do it if it justifies prevention, detection of crime, or investigation of a crime. There is a moral argument involved. I'm not going to comment on that. Everyone will have their own feelings. There is potential reputational damage and the reputation that goes with it. And all of that is based on the risk to the data subject. Is plastering somebody's photograph all over social media because they dropped some litter proportionate or appropriate? I don't know. Your balancing test would need to assess that. I can't make that decision for you. You just need to be able to justify why you have done that. Some places will have different answers to the others. We see the police using similar tactics regularly. However, I think it's worth noting that you don't see the police posting every petty criminal on social media. We're normally talking about more serious offences and individuals that pose a direct harm, threat to the public. So again, we're going back to that proportionality thing. You need to provide a thorough justification. I can't tell you what that justification is. You need to satisfy yourselves as data controllers.
Thank you very much. I'll just signpost the person who asked the question to Principle 1 of the Surveillance Camera Code of Practice, which is that you must justify a pressing need to implement the system, yes, but generally to operate the system. And part of the considerations there were things like, what the severity of the problem is. Is there an alternative way to fix the problem without taking this action? And, those are the things that you will need to consider essentially. But Lewis, just very briefly, if you could chip in as to what your perspective is as someone who's on the ground, so to speak, on that question.
Yeah, in terms of, there's a number of local authorities that do naming and shaming walls. So things like fly tipping, where you can watch interesting videos of people unloading mattresses and fridges and cupboards onto country lanes. Now, we do that. We have got a naming and shaming video wall, but we've taken the view, and I'm not saying this is correct, but it was a considered view that is the footage personal data if you don't know who that individual is. So it's identifiable individuals. So there is that argument you can consider here. Now we haven't gone that one step further forward and put it on social media. The problem with that is that where I've advised my local authority is that as soon as we get intelligence either from the police or another member of the public that individual is a named individual, we take that footage down. We immediately take that footage down. So we only publish the footage whilst we don't know who that individual is. As soon as we know, that information comes down off our website. You wouldn't be able to do that if you were publishing it on social media. If it's on social media, it's gone forever, so to speak. So we don't put it on social media because we cannot manage the onward processing of that information to some extent. I know the internet, they could copy it off the internet, but we can manage what's published on our website.
Thank you very much, Lewis. So, and I think that gives quite a thorough perspective. So I'm just going to ask Nat on what the future of this might look like from a technology advancement perspective. Do you think AI, live facial recognition are going to be things? And then I'm going to ask Lewis what the legislative changes you think you're preparing for in your position. So if we could have that.
Yeah, really interesting question, actually. I will hold my hands up and say I am not a tech expert by any means. I know about data protection law, but it's really interesting at the moment. I've been making a concerted effort to try and learn a little bit more about AI. And I don't doubt that we're going to see AI creep more and more into the tech that we're using regularly. We already see it. I mean, how many of us carry around an iPhone that has facial recognition as an unlocking thing? You know, it's already seeping into our kind of day-to-day life. However, that's becoming a more public kind of processing. I mean, there's the potential people who are definitely going to have the option. The technology, the hardware is certainly going to go that way. It already exists. I think it's actually going to be driven, what we see on the ground and what we see actually being used is going to be driven more by the legislative changes and how the justification for that technology comes along. At the moment, using AI facial recognition at, you know, like Lewis was saying, at every door entry is not justifiable. I don't think that's necessary. So it's going to be about, yes, we're going to see some really exciting technology advancements. Even the smallest of things we'll see seeping into CCTV. I'm sure lots of people have seen on the news that Apple's new kind of VR headset, the functionality that it's using could be used in CCTV. We're talking about streaming media ultimately. So yeah, all of those things are certainly going to improve. The conference that Mel and I attended recently, there was some incredible tech on display, and, you know, with tracking and various sort of automatic recognition softwares. But until the legislation changes, we are still in that same position of having to justify what we're using. So yeah, certainly exciting, certainly going to see some really fun things around, but I think we're still a fair way off seeing it being used in day-to-day processing.
Thank you very much, Nat. So, Lewis, from the legislative aspect, are there any particular changes you're warming up for, so to speak?
So can you say that again, Kunbi?
Are there any legislative changes? What are you seeing on the horizon? Are you watching out for any changes from a legal standpoint?
I'm keeping a watchful eye on the data protection and privacy bill that's going through legislation at the moment, but I'm not sure how that's going to impact on us with any of this. But it's we as I said before, we've engaged this. We've engaged this new firm of consultants to look at our strategy going forward to 2030. I'm hoping that they're going to start referring us to some of this technology that Natalie has mentioned as she's seen it at the show. I'm not a techie, so I mentioned earlier about the facial recognition technology that our IT people have installed the equipment, but haven't turned on the facial technology. The equipment also allows touch card sensitive door opening as well, so it's used for that at the moment. But it has the potential to develop into facial recognition to allow staff into secure areas of the building. I can see us having to negotiate and discuss with unions if that is a way forward. At the moment, nobody's really pushing for it. It's just one of the tools in the technology we've got at the moment that in the toolbox that isn't being used. So I don't know what else to say on this particular matter. We just wait and see what the consultation is that we've got going at the moment, and see what they come up with.
Thank you very much, Lewis. And someone has asked a question about using AI, and the answer to that is a DPIA is supposed to be based on the processing activity that you as an organization are undertaking. So if you are trialing or intending to trial any sort of AI implementation to search, more efficiently, like you given that example, then it's your responsibility to implement it. So a DPIA is a fairly flexible process, and it's designed to be customized to the specific needs of your organization and the processing activity you're intending to undertake. So yes, if you're implementing AI, and we have seen some instances of that, you will need to evaluate that as part of your DPIA. And now I'm just going to ask Nat with regard to all these services here, but specifically in regard to a gap analysis, or how you would advise an organization that is looking to, switch up their CCTV system. How would you advise them to proceed from a compliance perspective?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Kunbi. I'm just going to backtrack slightly. Lewis, I saw you just replied to that question. We had a really interesting question about deep searches. I am not familiar with the technology. I know that it exists. Issues with it, I would say my biggest issue would be accuracy. So just be careful with its matching data sets. So, it needs some human intervention would probably be the first thing that I would be concerned about. But yeah, it'd be really interesting actually to hear a bit more about that. So if you're willing to get in touch, then please do. Sorry, Kunbi, back to your question. Yeah, gap analysis. I think it's just a really good place to start. For anyone that's sort of listening and thinking, I don't know if we've got all of these things in place. It's the perfect benchmarking exercise. It gives you that kind of starting point. What have we got? What haven't we got? What do we maybe need to do? DPAS can do that kind of standard audity thing. We can come and we can ask the questions. We can give you a report saying, this is what you've got. This is what you need to do. There is alternatives. Lewis, obviously in a valuable position with such an engaged team and external consultants helping. That initial consultation period that you went through was fantastic. But I think early stages, get as much information about what you're doing or what you intend to do as possible, and get it in one place. There's lots of ways of doing that, but let's analyze what you've got, understand what you've got. If you can't understand what's already in place, you're never ever going to be able to improve it or implement any kind of good change.
Thank you very much, Natalie. And just to let you know about our webinar, but before that, I should point the person who asked the question about AI to the fact that in the surveillance camera code of practice, principle 9 or 10, I believe, speaks to the fact that if you're going to be using any fully automated system, a human being must be involved if it is going to have any adverse effect on a person. So that's something to consider in this kind of DPIA. So we have webinars such as this one that you are attending, and we're going to be having the next one on the 21st of June on the subject of privacy by design, which is the first thing that Lewis spoke about, how it's important to integrate privacy and data protection into any system you're implementing in your organization from the beginning. So that's baked in and it's ready to go, and you don't have to try to tack it on inefficiently at the end of the process. We have a survey we're going to be sending to everyone who attended this webinar, and it's going to come automatically following the end of the event, and we would appreciate your responding to that survey, so it will help us to tailor these events much more effectively going forward into the future. We have a tool, a CCTV preliminary audit tool that we're working on, and we'll be sharing with everyone soon as well. So keep an eye out for that. The aim is to help you get an initial assessment of how you can improve your processes. We are very grateful at DPAS to Lewis, who has joined us today, shared his wealth of expertise over almost 2 decades of experience as a data protection consultant. So that's definitely nothing to sneeze at. We have Nat, who is highly experienced as well, advising public sector, private sector organizations on complying with data protection and privacy law. And we are very grateful to them for showing up and sharing their wealth of experience with us. Thank you very much to all of you who have attended as well. We hope to see you in future webinars and other events that we are going to be hosting. Thank you very much and have a great day, everyone.